Welcome to Charity Village Connects. I'm Mary Barrell. Over many years, the leadership of the Canadian nonprofit sector has been criticized for its lack of diversity. Recently, the Diversity Institute, in partnership with CivicAction, has released an important report entitled Diversity and Inclusion in Nonprofit Leadership in Ontario. Are we there yet? Joining us today to discuss the findings of the report and the current state of equity and diversity in Canada's nonprofit leadership is Leslie Wu, CEO of CivicAction. Leslie Wu is a respected city leader with over 25 years of lived experience and expertise in building sustainable communities and shaping urban development in Canada's fastest growing urban region, the Greater Toronto Area. As CEO at CivicAction, Leslie leads coalitions of civil society through transformative action. Her vast experience is instrumental in catalyzing and accelerating the collaboration needed to solve complex challenges, including the challenges related to the diversity of charitable leadership. Welcome to the podcast, Leslie.
Thank you, Mary. Thrilled to be here.
Well, I'd love to learn more about your new report on diversity and inclusion in nonprofit leadership in Ontario. What made you decide to partner with the Diversity Institute on this initiative, and why did you feel it was important at this time to conduct this report?
So, a couple things. First of all, the Diversity Institute has been a tremendous partner with CivicAction since its origins, and I would say the issues that they're tackling continue to be relevant and important. And so, when we knew that the Diversity Institute had already begun some research on the status of governance in the not-for-profit sector a couple of years before, we were about to undertake an initiative very much focused on supporting rising leaders in spaces taking their place at decision-making tables in the not-for-profit and public sector. And so we turned to a natural partner to do that. And the timeliness of it is really in the context of the issues we have seen, through the pandemic, the widening gap in terms of equity across the board. And we all have to ask ourselves, who's making the decisions? How are we ending up in the place where we are? And there's not a ton of research to really ground the conversation on. There's a lot of anecdotes, there's a lot of lived experience that's being shared, but we always at CivicAction like to start with the data. And so knowing that Wendy Cooker and her team had really strong methods in doing this research and experience in doing this research, we went to them to partner with them to help us base our design of our leadership programs with this information.
And what do you feel are some of the most important findings that the report produced?
So I think in many respects, the findings, unfortunately, were not very surprising in the sense that the trend we have seen for the last several decades around representation at the board tables and public sector a little improved, but not as much, has not shifted dramatically. But what we now have are the hard facts around it. I think what the report does very well is sort of talk about not only the methods and the research methodology, but it provides some really great insights on where we should be going. And what's so sort of, I think, helpful and practical about it, it talks about solutions at the scale of society broadly and very much in the what is the role of public policy in this issue. It talks about what the not-for-profit organizations themselves can do, and then also points to what individuals can do. So it's a very 360 approach to the information that's gathered. So, I always say data gathering is one thing, it's information, but how do we transform that into knowledge and wisdom in terms of how we act? So of particular note, I would say, is that the fact that when it comes particular on issues of gender and gender representation, we've sort of stalled a little bit. And despite keeping in mind that this research was done right after pandemic, right after the George Floyd incident, at a time when there's heightened interest on the issue of DI, if ever there was going to be a time where we could make a shift, one would have thought this was a time. But really, um, it speaks to the scale at which the problem is increasing. And so while we are making steps forward, it's a catch up and keep up because we're not keeping pace with the changes that are happening in society.
Were there any findings that you found surprising or things that came up in the research that were unexpected?
I think one of the new findings around the research on representation is the information about intersectionality. And in particular, the ability to distinguish between the additional challenges let's use women, racialized women face versus non-racialized women, or if you are someone with a disability and a woman, or if you are LGBTQ and from the Indigenous community. Those intersections, this is the first time I think we've really been able to unfold that to see a bit more about what's happening in that space and whether or not we're making better inroads in what has become a more complex sort of composition of our society.
In your opinion, are organizations and leaders in the sector doing enough to create tangible, meaningful change on their boards and in their leadership teams?
So I I tend generally, Mary, to try and be optimistic about where we're heading. And so I continue to congratulate the many organizations that are making headway. But it would be it's irresponsible for me to say all is rosy. We see the progress as spotty. So in some places, and it's very dependent on the leadership itself. In the instances where the board itself is more diverse, we see more progress because there's a heightened awareness about the importance of and also how to retain diverse board members so that they feel they feel included and they feel like they belong and are part of the decision making. But that isn't always the case. I would say that we have some, especially in the not-for-profit sector, where there are a lot of foundations, family foundations, other types of foundations that have been around for a long, long time, and they're not necessarily feeling the effects or being driven to think that a change is necessary because things seem to be going well for them. The problem with that is, of course, the not-for-profit sector and the charitable sector, their purpose is in service of the public. And the public, as we define it, has is dramatically been changing over time. And so I would say that really we'd like to see more progress. We're very encouraged through our board shift initiative, which I can talk about some more, where we've had um, corporations and not-for-profit corporations and public, particularly municipalities, sign on to an inclusion charter, making the commitment to not only bring people on board, but to work towards their own activities to retain those individuals and nurture those individuals onto the boards themselves.
Well, I wanted to ask a question, mainly because I had the opportunity to interview Senator Ratna Omidvar this morning about a new bill that I think is relevant to your report's findings. It's Bill S 279, and what it proposes to do was to amend the Income Tax Act to require charities to report on the diversity of their board in their T1030s, which is, of course, their annual report return that they have to submit to the CRA. And the idea is to measure year to year the kind of diversity that might exist across Canada among the governorship, the board's governors of not for profits, or rather only charities across Canada. would be able to provide the data that we need that isn't anecdotal, to understand the kind of progress year to year of the diversification of representation on boards. I wonder what your thoughts are about such a bill should it be enacted, and would it provide support for this increased initiative to have more diversity among charitable boards and not for profits?
So I think it's great to put in place within the system a mechanism for accountability and a lot of awareness around this, around the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in our governance structures. So absolutely, and the more transparent that we can be about what's happening, the greater I think strides we can make. I think the caution I would say is around it becoming a checkbox. So it's one thing to have representation, it's another thing to have inclusion. So it will be really important. So I think it's an important piece of the puzzle. But without the genuine interest by a board to value that diversity as part of everything that it does, um, uh, it could be short-lived and it might not go as deep as it needs to go within an organization to enable and enact change. So I think very positive, but it'll still be the responsibility of the organizations to take it to the next level for it to really have a full effect.
Well, it's interesting. Your partner in this report at the Diversity Institute, Dr. Wendy Suk here, she has a phrase that goes something like, "What you can't measure, you can't accomplish, or it doesn't get done." And I wonder, how important is it for us to measure the kind of diversification that is happening in not charitable governance on their boards?
It's absolutely important, and I wouldn't disagree with Wendy's statement because it is the data and the measurements are what we anchor ourselves from. You know, we can't know if we're going up, down, or sideways if we don't even know where we stand. So, absolutely, it is critical. And it's also critical, in the not for profit sector, we are in the impact business. And we want to really make sure in terms of our own responsibility to our funders and those who support us that we are walking the talk. And I would say it's the same thing for the public sector. You know, it's your taxpayers' dollars. You want to know that public boards and agencies and commissions are reflective, their governance is reflective of the community they serve. So without a doubt, I think I would wholeheartedly agree with Wendy's assertion.
Well, I want to turn now to learn more about Civic Action. Can you tell us about some of Civic Action's programs and how they can help nonprofit organizations create this kind of meaningful change?
Thanks a lot, Mary. And the organization Civic Action, we have been in existence for 2 decades now. The origin of the organization was right after SARS, when our founder David Pico really made an effort to bring civil society together because there was such an important crisis the city had faced and the need to convene, collaborate, co-create solutions from that. What in doing that, when he gathered all these leaders, when they looked around at each other, they said, "We're going to put all this effort in. We're going to push to make change, but how do we sustain it?" And it was from that that's a few years later, the organization made big commitments to the importance of rising leaders being civic minded and civically engaged in in the future of the city and the region. And so our leadership programs really target rising leaders within our community who already oftentimes they're mid-career, but who really want to be part of positive change for themselves and for their community. So they come with a predisposition to be one of part of that change. And what we have done through our leadership programs are a couple of things. We have connected them, one, to each other. So it's a multi-industry, multi-sector network. And we do that through our Emerging Leaders Network. It's about 3,000 plus strong across the region. And they themselves organize events, gatherings. We support them in bringing leaders to talk, fireside chats, panel discussions, and it really helps them better understand, as we say, the water that they're swimming in. So they understand how decisions are made, who are the leaders, and they build their social capital through their networks. The second part of our programming, which is our fellows program, is a very curated 1 year experience for a selected group, 25 to 30 every year. We refer to it as a civics MBA, which is a more intense and bespoke experience. We've been doing it now. We're in our 14th year. We have from our first cohort or second cohort, they're no longer rising leaders. They've risen. They sit at boardrooms on Bay Street. They lead social enterprises. Some have run for political office successfully. So we have had that great track record with our fellows program. Board Shift is one of our newer, but not super new initiatives and very much related to this issue of governance. Back in the early 2000s, the organization, actually with Senator Omnivar, started an initiative. It's actually how I got my first volunteer board position at the YMCA GTA, which was this importance of diversity on boards. And over the years, it's had many host organizations. In 2021, we took back the assets and we've completely revamped the platform to 2023-24 technology. And it is a 10-hour asynchronous online learning platform that allows rising leaders to go through 3 really important modules about what it takes and what you need to know to sit on a board. So they are now fully qualified. And then the second thing is we offer organizations who are seeking diverse talent to be on their boards access to this talented pool. And that has really been a really important connector to enable, I think, to address a number of things. One, often we hear on not-for-profit or public boards, we don't know where to find diverse candidates, or we don't know where they are. And if we see them, we don't know how qualified they are. Will they know how to sit around a board table? And Board Shift really tries to support those rising leaders, not only with the knowledge through the training modules, but also a network of other rising leaders who also are going through the same experience as they are. And then we offer a bit of coaching to help them work through. And then our third initiative is called Civic Match. It is really a really intimate conversation between C-suite leaders and 3 or 4 Indigenous, Black, or racialized rising leaders with the ability to create the potential for mentorship and sponsorship. But it is really meant to break down the barriers. If you can imagine, we have a large number of newcomers, first generation immigrants. Their families don't have the established social capital that you would have if you're 4th, 5th, 6th generation in the city or in the region. And so that program enables rising leaders to have a rapid access or sort of view into what the leadership within the city is like. And so whether we have the city manager from the city of Toronto or the CEO from a bank sit down with 3 or 4 of these folks, it always is very magical.
Well, that's a very robust group of programs that certainly, at least 2 of them, it seem very directly connected to your work with this report. I wonder, have you heard from your diverse city fellows or some of the other folks that are the rising leaders in your programs in terms of what their experiences are with nonprofit board leadership. Does it match up with what you heard in the report?
Yeah, I think it does in the sense that most often, from our rising leaders, they're very qualified. Some of them are technically incredibly adept. They've got a profession, but they sort of sit there going, I don't know how, or who to call, or where do I go? And if I say, well, you go to this website and there's all these opportunities, it's almost overwhelming, and they have found that often they'll put their name sort of like a cold call. If there's a call, not all not-for-profits do open calls. That's the other thing. But if they do put it in, they're 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 not sure which lane to go through. They need a little bit of a navigation, and they don't feel confident. This is a confidence thing as well. They don't feel confident that they're qualified to sit in those places. There's a little bit of imposter syndrome, right? Like why would anyone want me? I don't have the experience, and we work with them to help them build that confidence because of the type of training. But I think the barriers that they face, it's not, it's a combination of the encouragement and the sponsorship from leaders to say, yes, you can do it, and let me introduce you to this organization or that organization because I think you might be interested in it and they might be interested in you. And so I think relative to the report, the outcomes that the report is indicating, what I'm describing is what I would say some of the causes why we see the numbers not going up in the way that they should. And I saw, so we are very sort of avidly trying to expand the number of rising leaders that we can give more access to the opportunities.
What do you think nonprofit boards of directors need to understand in order to work towards better inclusion and equity on their boards and in their decision making?
So, I think the data has already shown this, but just to recap, most boards, there's two things that happen. One, when they're thinking about where they're, the next round, their next AGM, who they should bring to the table, they often just look around, open up their contact database, ask a friend of a friend, and that is a limited pool to go from, and oftentimes doesn't have a pathway or a doorway to more diverse communities. So that is when I think about what boards should be doing more of, is recognizing that limitation and thinking about other processes other than how they traditionally would go about seeking new board members. There's a little bit of a catch-22, I would say, which is my second point, that in the not-for-profit sector, a lot of the work of boards is fundraising. And the fundraising to run a not-for-profit, if I just to use the not-for-profit as an example, is about access to where the money is, which is the 1%, the 0.1%, which is not the most diverse. I mean, it's improving, but that philanthropic pool is not the most diverse. So when the board is thinking about what are the skills they want, so whether it's legal or finance or HR, one of the overriding sort of demands on a not-for-profit is around fundraising. And so that presents challenges to rising leaders of diverse backgrounds. If they are either new to the country or mid-career, they're not going to have necessarily the extent of the network that would enable them to be a contributor in that way. So boards need to think that not every member of the board will bring a different value proposition, and that there is, and I'll say this for myself because I know when I was on my first board appointment, I almost felt guilty because, when the list passed around about, do you know this person, this person, I was like, oh my goodness, no, I do not know these folks because it's not in my network. And at that time of my career, but what the board was really positive about is assuring me that my value from a strategy standpoint, or my expertise in urban planning and architecture and land development, was of value to the organization because of the work and the strategies that were going on at the time. So a board needs to always acknowledge that while for a not-for-profit in particular, fundraising is critical, not every member of the board will be able to bring that to the table. And so you don't want to dismiss a candidate who will bring a very different lived experience and expertise and point of view only because you don't think they have the fundraising capacity. I think the third thing, Mary, is boards need to really understand or often are worried about the risk they take when someone is not known to them. To the earlier point about, well, I know this one, or somebody I know knows this one. And so I think the more board members on an ongoing basis have better connections with the diverse range of stakeholders to whom they are serving in their community, that they don't just sit in a glass box at a board table, that they're really getting to understand and know stakeholders and the folks that they're supporting, they're better able they are to be more receptive to more diverse candidates. And yeah, I think that plus, of course, just generally wider and more open recruitment methods are usually very, very helpful.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the Hire Next platform and talking since we're on the subject of recruitment. Hire Next is a platform which Charity Village has partnered with you on. Can you explain what it is to our listeners and how it can help them improve diversity in their hiring practices?
Happy to, Mary. And we're very proud of the Hire Next. It was a great partnership with Charity Village, but it was also a great partnership with some folks from the private sector and as well the federal government. So the Future Skills organization and Accenture were great partners with us. The problem Hire Next is sought to solve, we had a whole roundtable of employment providers, youth organizations, was the question of what are the barriers to young people to employment? Why are we not seeing more young people find their way to really employment that is not of their caliber or not being underemployed? And so what we did in that case was really focus in on recruitment and what were the barriers to recruitment. And so, and this is particularly with entry level roles as well. And in terms of finding the applicants, I think the data shows that's something like this would have been in 2019 data, about 800,000 Canadian youth, that's young people between 15 and 29 years of age, where they weren't in employment, education, or training, like none of those things. And that's a big burden for society to carry if we don't enable those young people to have employment. So we launched this initiative, Hire Next, to close that gap with a focus to helping organizations update their human resources practices and to better connect equity deserving youth to opportunities and help employers fill their talent gaps. And so with the support of Accenture, as I mentioned, we launched an HR assessment free online tool. What it did is you filled out a survey as an organization, and it would create a customized recruitment recommendations based on hiring practices. So, we'd ask questions like when you do an interview, do you have how many women or racialized people are sitting in the room, because there is bias in everything that we do. And then we followed up that tool with an AI-enabled job posting assessment. So how we write a job can be a deterrent to young people. And for example, a high emphasis on multiple years of experience or education levels for entry-level jobs seems a bit extreme. But if you look at job descriptions, that's what they're asking for. So before even submitting an application, young people will look at it and say, well, that's I can't do that. Wherein in fact they may have an extraordinary lived experience that is equivalent to a kind of academic experience for the type of job that is being offered. So That AI assisted tool plus the first online tool really have supported a number of organizations, corporations, businesses in improving their hiring practices. And we're really happy to now have incubated it, got it up and running, and then partner with CharityVillage and Talent Egg to expand the reach of the tools and the program itself.
Well, we're, of course, very proud to partner with you on that and get a wider audience for these very useful resources. You work with a wide network of emerging leaders from across the Greater Toronto Area. How do these leaders, really the future of our sector, expect that organizations will be addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion issues within their organizations? What are the expectations of these potential talent that may well be the future leaders of the organizations? What are their attitudes?
Well, we are seeing a huge turn in what rising leaders and young leaders expect from the workplace, especially. I think the traditional model of hardworking meritocracy, where it's a strong hierarchy, decisions are made, um, the value system is shifting. And so the importance of your own personal well-being and health and your ability to feel that your contribution is deliberate and with purpose. My observation is our rising leaders are demanding more and more of that in the workplace. And so they are looking twice as hard at who they want to work for. Some of them are very much uh, really wanting to understand how they're being compensated to ensure that it is equitable. They want more transparency about their peers and their colleagues in the organization in and of itself about how that's happening. I would say they are impatient for the pace of change. And so, on issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, many folks of that cohort in that age group do not want an organization to just be about a checkbox. They want to see them live the values, and they want to see the change within an organization not be gradual or slow. They're impatient about it, and so I think we have seen this wave of interest heightened through the pandemic, further heightened in 2020 with the murder of George Floyd. And it's not unique to the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area, Mary. I would say this is a global phenomenon, and organizations, employers, if they're not paying attention to this, they will struggle with retention and they will struggle with their employee satisfaction and engagement. And so I think we are, and there isn't probably isn't an organization, big, small, or anything in between, who isn't really trying to adapt to that new work environment and the priorities that the change, the shift in priorities. You know, I think most of our rising leaders do not see DEI as something that happens from the corner of a desk. They see it needs to be built into the values and behaviors of the leaders that they work for, and there's a heightened expectation about the role of leaders in this space. And and I think they are also, on a very positive note, 100% up to the challenge. They're driven, they're smart, and they're full of great ideas. And I think we need to be able to be really receptive and listening because they want to be partners in the change. They don't want to sit on the other side of the table for the change, and we hear that all the time. And they're an incredible set of generation, and I mean, part of why I love the job I have now is because it makes me incredibly hopeful about the future that we have ahead for ourselves.
Well, actually, in closing, I wanted to kind of explore that with you. Overall, are you optimistic that we'll see a real shift in the years to come in terms of diversity and inclusion at the leadership level in the nonprofit sector?
So, as I said earlier, I see opportunity in every crisis, and so I continue to be optimistic that we will chart a new course. I think the road is not going to be easy, but we have what it takes within ourselves, within the leadership that I see that's in the pipeline coming up to make this happen. I think my generation and all those around, we need to know when to step to the side and allow the change to happen. And I think with that in mind, and looking upon where we see the resistance, to try and find opportunity even within there, because there are even the organizations who are not moving as quickly. Oftentimes, they're not a monolith. There are oftentimes within those organizations champions who want to move things forward. And if we support those individuals or those small groups, whether outside in the kind of networks and supports we provide them, we will make the change happen. So yes, I am optimistic. And despite the fact that also at the same time recognizing it is not going to be a smooth, easy sailing to get to the goals that we want, but we should never give up because we have a whole other generation of folks who are calling us all to account.
Well, Leslie, as they say, anything that's worth having is often requires a lot of effort and work and dedication. So um, I'm in agreement with you on that. Thank you for your insights into your important and timely report on the diversity of Canadian nonprofit leadership. Your expertise and perspectives are so very valuable to nonprofit leaders as they pursue their EDI journeys for their organizations. So thank you for joining us on Charity Village Connects.
Mary, is there something I could just add at the very, very end, if it's okay? I just want to, for all the listeners and people wondering what they themselves can do as organizations or individuals, Civic Action, we have partnered with the Diversity Institute on the 50/30 Challenge. And the 50/30 Challenge calls on Canadian businesses to aspire towards gender parity at 50% and representation of equity deserving groups is 30% in boards and senior leaderships. So I ask anyone out there to really think about taking up and signing up for the challenge because it's another form of accountability for your organization, and it does help move the bar.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, Leslie. Charity Village and myself, in particular, in person, has been actively involved in some of the committees related to the execution of the 50/30 challenge for many organizations and the certification process that we're exploring now. So I was derelict in not mentioning that important program and the supports that the 50/30 challenge actually give to organizations as they make this transition and continue their EDI journey. So thank you so much for reminding me of that and making sure that we're not ignoring the 50/30 challenge as an important resource for so many nonprofits that could make that kind of change. So thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Mary.